Hey, hello. Hello, hello. Anybody out there today? LisaMarie, kind of not a pop quiz. I just kind of popped in here out of the blue. And I am going to read chapter 3 of The Greatest Miracle in the World by Mandino. Chapter 9 in this book is called the God Memorandum. It's something that I give away completely free. I know a lot of other people do the same thing. If this has resonated with me, and that's why I'm doing it. I was challenged to 100 days of reading chapter 9, 100 days in a row every night before I went to bed. And I am on day 79 today. Super tickled about that. But I had attempted this challenge a few times, and in the past, well, quite a bit in the past, I never read the book until like a couple of years ago. But it just stands the reason why I did not succeed because I did not read this book before I attempted, that challenge. So I had no idea what the source was, what it was about. None of it made sense to me. So I failed, you know. Confused people do nothing. Have you heard that before? Anyway, that was me. And too embarrassed to ask or, just put that out there. Hey, I'm not getting this or how, I don't know. You got to be slapped upside the head sometimes for things to sink in. I don't know. But anyway, I did it the right way this time. And I am so excited that I'm on day 79 and I absolutely will complete it. And it's just meant so much more to me this time. So I opted to read you guys the source where that God memorandum came from. So I'm just going to start chapter 3. What happened on chapter 2? Let's just kind of bring you up to date. They finally met again. A whole entire year almost went by. And then Simon was in that parking lot again. And he saw the rag picker, the Simon with Og. I'm sorry. Og was the name I was supposed to say. Og saw the rag picker, Simon, in the parking lot again with his dog Lazarus, and they were so excited. That's the first time that they had seen each other since that first snow, the blizzard, and him holding up that gate and all of that, and then he just disappeared. So anyway, now they went to Simon's apartment and they were going to have a glass of sherry. So they chatted, they got really close, and Simon showed Mandino his book collection, and it was this huge, I mean, it covered 2 whole walls, just this massive book collection. So Simon went away to get the sherry, and Og was staring at all of it and just in amazement. So long story short, they parted at the end of the evening, but they became much closer. And so the story goes. All right. So several days later, I'm starting chapter 3. As I was getting out of my car in the parking lot, I heard my name being called with a volume of sound only slightly lower in decibel count than the public address system at Wrigley Field. I looked around but couldn't see him. Mr. Og, up here. Simon was leaning out of his second floor apartment window over a plant filled window box, waving a small blue watering can to attract my attention. I waved. Mr. Og, your book. Don't forget, you promised. I nodded. He pointed inside his apartment. This evening, before you go home. I nodded again. He smiled and shouted, "I'll have your sherry ready." I threw him a circled thumb and forefinger, locked the car, and headed for the problems of the day. "Simon Potter, who are you?" "Simon Potter, what are you?" "Simon Potter, why are you?" Like some simple, almost forgotten roundelay from my youth, I found myself silently repeating these three questions in time with my step as I hurried toward the office. I have been unable to get a handle on my feelings about the old man, and it bothered me. He fascinated me, and for some reason, he frightened me. Both his appearance and his demeanor fit all of the preconceived notions of how the biblical prophets and mystics must have looked and acted. And I would think about him in the strangest times, in the middle of the budget meeting, while reading submitted articles, while writing a book review. His face, his voice, his charismatic manner would intrude themselves into whatever I was thinking and momentarily wipe out my concentration. Who was he? Where did he come from? What was this latter day Isaiah doing in my life? Maybe I'd get some answers this evening. For my own peace of mind, I hope so. Toward closing time, I asked Pat Smith, my secretary, to requisition a copy of my book, The Greatest Salesman in the World. From our inventory, she paused in the doorway and, after placing the book in my hands, "Anything else, Og?" "No, thanks, Pat. See you in the morning. Good night." "Good night. And don't forget to turn off the coffee machine." "I won't. You said that last time when you worked late, and you ruined 2 pots." I heard her lock the outside door while I sat holding the book, my creation that was now being acclaimed by Publishers Weekly as the bestseller that nobody knows. In 4 years, it had never made the big city bestseller list, and yet, with a phenomenal sale of 400,000 hardcover copies, it had already outsold every hardcover edition of every book written by Harold Robbins, Irving Wallace, and Jacqueline Suzanne. Now there were rumors that several paperback houses were interested in acquiring the reprint rights. And they were talking big money, 6-digit money. Home run. What if it all happened? Could I handle it? Could I cope with all that sudden wealth and the national publicity that would surely follow a promotional campaign conducted by any of the large paperback houses? What kind of a personal price would I end up paying for all this? Would I regret it later? I remembered what Simon had said about the lifetime prisons we build around ourselves. Would this kind of success be a key release myself, or a key to lock myself in? What more did I want from life anyway? Would I change my lifestyle if I had that kind of financial freedom? Who can really ever have an answer to those questions before the fact? I tried to put it all as what ifs, thoughts out of my mind, and opened the book to autograph it for Simon. What could I inscribe in the flyleaf that would be appropriate for this Satan-like man? Somehow, proper words were important to me. And what would an expert on Gibran, Plutarch, Plato, Seneca, and Isley think of my little book after he had read it? That was important to me. So I began to write for Simon Potter, God's finest rag picker. With love, Mandino. I remembered to turn off the coffee machine, turned on the burglar alarm, flipped off the lights, locked up, and I walked across the shadowy parking lot to his apartment building. I found number 21 scrawled yellow crayon above one of the lobby mailboxes, hit the bell button twice, and climbed the stairs. Simon was waiting for me in the hall. You remembered. You reminded me. Ah, yes. Like most old men, I am both rude and presumptuous. Forgive me my trespasses. Mr. Odd, come in, come in. While we were still standing, we conducted our exchange. I handed him my book and he gave me a glass of sherry. He frowned when he read the title. The Greatest Salesman in the World? Very interesting. May I guess who that might be? You'll never guess, Simon. It's not who you think it is. Then he opened the cover and read my inscription. His face seemed to soften, and when he looked at me, his big brown eyes were moist. Thank you. I know I shall enjoy it. But why did you inscribe in it such a manner? Rag picker, yes, but God's finest? I pointed toward his stack of books. When I was here before, you were telling me about your theory that some books were written and guided by the hand of God. I just figured that if I could recognize when a writer has been touched by God's hand, you must be a special friend of his. He studied my face intently, staring at me for interminably uncomfortable minutes until I broke our eye contact. And you would like me to read your book and decide whether or not I think it belongs in the same category as the others? Assisted by the hand of God, as it were. I don't know whether I want you to do that or not, Simon. Maybe subconsciously I do, but I hadn't thought about it. All I know for sure is that I get the strangest premonitions when I'm with you. You are in my mind a good deal of the time. I don't know why. The old man leaned his head back on his overstuffed chair and closed his eyes. His premonition is a forewarning, a foreboding of something about to happen. Is that how you feel when you are with me or when you think about me? I'm not quite sure. That explains the sensation. Perhaps it is a feeling that we have met before or shared some experience in the past. What do you French call it? Ah, yes, déjà vu. That's closer to it. Have you ever had a dream and then when you woke, you tried and tried to remember it, and all that remained in your memory were shadows and unrecognizable voices, no meaning, no relationship to your life? The old man nodded many times. Well, that's how I feel when I am with you or think about you. I guess the kids call it vibes, only I can't characterize it because I never experienced it before. The mind is a very strange mechanism, Mr. Odd. Simon, I couldn't even begin to guess how many books and magazine articles I've read about the mind in the past 10 years for possible use in my magazine. Yet the more I read, the more I have to come to realize how very little we know about that mystery within us, or even where it's located. The old man rubbed his hand across his cheek and said, Dr. Carl Menninger wrote that the human mind is far more than the brain's little bag of tricks. It is, instead, the entire personality made up of a human's instincts, habits, memories, organs, muscles, and sensations, all going through a constantly changing process. Melody, hi. I'm so sorry. I guess I was kind of engulfed here. If you're still on, thank you so much for popping in here. Okay, where was I here? I know Dr. Menninger personally. Really? Yeah. What kind of man is he? He's a giant of a man, almost your size, a beautiful man like you. And he always has a twinkle in his eye when he speaks. Is there, what do you call it, a twinkle in my eyes, Mr. Ogg? Sometimes, Simon, sometimes. He smiled sadly. I like best what Milton wrote about his mind, about the mind. The mind is its own place, and it is itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of a heaven. Mr. Og, our mind is the greatest creation on earth, and it can generate the most sublime happiness for its owner, or it can destroy him. Yet, although we have been given the secret of how to control it for our happiness and benefit, we still function completely ignorant of its potential, like the most stupid of animals. The secret of how to control our mind for our benefit, Simon pointed toward the book stacks. It's all there. One has only to study the treasures that lay exposed all around us. For countless centuries, man compared his mind to a garden. Seneca said that soil, no matter how rich, could not be productive without cultivation, and neither could our minds. Excuse me, I have to take a sip because I'm dry. You are what you think. Absolutely, Melody. For sure. Okay, where was I here? I had my finger on it and then I moved it. Okay, that's all right. I'm just going to go back a titch. All right. Oh, yeah, I was there for sure. Okay, let's just start right here. Seneca said that soil, no matter how rich, could not be productive without cultivation, and neither could our minds. Sir Joshua Reynolds wrote that our mind was only barren soul, soon exhausted and unproductive unless it was continually fertilized with new ideas. And James Allen, in his monumental classic, As a Man Thinketh, wrote that a man's mind was like a garden. Oh, I did read that. Shoot, I'm so sorry. Which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild, but whether cultivated or neglected, it would produce. If no useful seeds were planted, then an ambulance of useless weed seeds would fall into the land, and the result would be wrong, useless, harmful, and impure plants. In other words, whatever we allow to enter our minds, we always bear fruit. Just what Melody just said. Hi, Patsy. Oh, I'm so glad you're hopped on. Thank you. I'm reading Og Mandino, The Greatest Miracle in the World. I'm on right in the middle of chapter 3. This is an amazing book. And I'll tell you how you can get just chapter 9 of it if you hang on. Okay, let's see. I lit a cigarette and hung on his every word. Now, man is comparing his mind to a computer, but his conclusions are the same as Seneca's and the O'Hare's. O'Hare's? O'Hare's? I don't know if that's a typo or not. The computer people have a phase, actually an acronym, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Boy, have I heard that before. If one puts faulty information into a computer, out will come faulty answers. So it is with our minds. Whether one is thinking in terms of a garden or an IBM 360, put negative material in and that's what you reap. On the other hand, if you program in or plant beautiful, positive, correct thoughts and ideas, that's what you'll harvest. So it's simple, you see. You can actually become whatever you are thinking. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, Allen wrote. Man is made or unmade by himself. In the armory of thought, he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself. I stop it. I read that a little bit slower because it's sinking in for me. So I'm not doing that to any other reason, just so you know that. Okay. By the right choice and true application of thought, man ascends to define perfection. Mr. Og, note those words. By the right choice. They are the cornerstone of a happy life, and perhaps at some other time you will let them elaborate. In other words, Simon, you're saying that we can program our mind, but how? Very simple. We can do it for ourselves, or others will do it for us. Merely by hearing or reading a thought or an affirmation, whether it be truthful or the vilest of lies, over and over, our mind will eventually imprint that thought and it will become a permanent part of our personality. So strong that we will even act on it without consideration or reflection in the future. Hitler, you may recall, did this to an entire country. And brainwashing is a phase with which we are all too familiar. After many said, sorry, I'm getting tongue tied here, experiences by our captured troops in the Orient. I don't know why that was a tough paragraph. Let me take a sip. Sorry. Okay. We become what we think, always. This seemed like a good opportunity to do some probing, and so I took it. Simon, tell me about yourself. Do you mind? He he shook his head, placed the wine glass on the lamp table, folded his hands on his lap, and looked down at them as he spoke. I do not mind. This opportunity has not come to me in many years. And I also realize that you are hoping I might touch upon some fact, some clue that will clarify whatever seems to concern you about our relationship. First, I am 78 years old and in good health. I have been in this country since 1946. You come here right after the war. Yes. What did you do before the war? He smiled. I realized it will require a good deal of blind faith on your part to believe me, but I headed the largest export-import firm in Germany that dealt exclusively with goods from the Middle East. My home was in Frankfurt, but the firm's main office was in, and I interrupted, Damascus? Damascus? With a question mark. He glanced at me strangely. Yes, Mr. Og, Damascus. I rubbed my hand across my face and down the rest of my sherry. How in the name of God did I know that? For some explicable reason, I had the sudden urge to get up and run out of his apartment. Instead, I just sat there with two absolutely immobile legs, paralyzed by an unknown dilemma. I didn't want to hear anymore, and yet I wanted to hear it all. The reporter in me finally won, and I began firing questions at him like some ambitious county prosecutor. He responded to each of my questions at his own pace. Simon, did you have any branch offices? 10 in the city of Jerusalem, Baghdad, Alexandria, Cairo, Beirut, Aleppo. 10? 10. What kind of merchandise did you export and import? Mostly goods and some degree of rarity and value. Finished wools and linens, fine glassware, precious stones, the finest rugs, some leather goods, coated papers. Your firm, you said, was large? We were the largest of its kind in the world. Our annual sales volume, even in the midst of the Depression in 1936, exceeded more than $200 million in American currency. And you were company president? Simon cocked his head shyly. It is not difficult to be company president when one is sole owner and founder. And he held up my book, pointing to the title, also the company top salesman. My host rose and refilled my glass. I downed half of it as I studied him carefully. Was he putting me on? Finally, I grasped his arm and turned him gently towards me, so I was staring directly into his eyes. Simon, in truth, you have already read my book? Forgive me, Mr. Ogg, but I have never seen a copy of your book until this very evening. Why? The greatest salesman in the world is set in the time of Christ. It tells the story of a young camel boy, Hafid, who had ambitions to become a salesman in order to earn his share of the gold that he was were the fruit of his efforts of the other salesmen in the caravan. Finally, after many rebuffs, Hafid is given one roll by the caravan master and dispatched to a nearby village called Bethlehem to prove that he could sell. Instead, the youth, after failing to sell the robe for 3 humiliating days, presents it to warm a newborn baby sleeping in a manger in a cave. Then he returned to the caravan, believing he had failed as a salesman, never noticing the bright star that followed him. But the caravan master interprets the star as a sign that had been prophesied many years before, and he gives our young man 10 scrolls of success, which the youth eventually applies to his life to become the greatest salesman in the world. That is a very touching plot, Mr. Ogg. There's more, Simon. When the youth, Hafid, becomes wealthy and powerful, he establishes his main warehouse in a certain city. Would you care to guess the city? Damascus? Yes, and in time he opens other warehouses and branches throughout the Middle East. How many, Simon? 10? Yes, again. And the goods he sold, as described in my book, were the same goods you sold. The old man turned his head away from me and spoke very slowly. Those are exceedingly strange coincidences, Mr. Ogg. I pressed on. Tell me about your family, Simon. He hesitated for several minutes before speaking. Well, as I have mentioned, my home was in Frankfurt. Actually, he lived in a suburb, Sachsenhausen. Um, I'm going to end up spitting on myself. Let's bypass that word. On a lovely estate in sight of the River Main, yet my time was limited. It seemed as if I had always saying goodbye to my family at the airport. More and more, I came to hate the days and the weeks when I was apart from my wife and young son. Finally, in 1935, I decided to do something about my life. I made very careful plans for the future. I decided to work very hard until 1940, and then I would take from the business sufficient assets for my family and me to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. Then I would transfer controlling interests in the company to those in my employ who had been so loyal to me through the years. I interrupted him again, and this time my voice broke. Simon, when you read my book, you will learn that my great salesman, Hafid, finally gave his business and most of his wealth to those who had helped him build it. The old man was frowning and shaking his head at me. That cannot be. That cannot be. You will read it for yourself. And what of your family? By this time, Hitler had come to power. Yet I, like most business people, had no idea of the monster we had blindly allowed to take control of our country. My wife was a Jew. I gotta take another drink, guys. I'm sorry, really dry. I love this book too, Melody. This is awesome. Okay. Yeah, if you can't get into it, I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, it makes the God Memorandum make perfect sense. It just, God, that just blows my mind. Anyway, here we go. My wife was a Jew, and while I was on one of my many trips to Damascus, I was visited one day by one of Hitler's agents. He calmly notified me that both my wife and son were in what he called protective custody, and they would be released to me only upon my signing over to the National Socialist Party, my entire company, and all its assets. I signed without hesitation. Then I immediately flew back to Frankfurt and was arrested by the secret police at the airport gate. I spent the entire war years being trucked from one concentration camp to another. Not being a Jew, I guess, saved my life. And your wife and son? I never saw them again. I started to say I'm sorry, but I didn't. And your business? Gone. Everything confiscated by the Nazis. After the war, I spent nearly 4 years trying to find any clue concerning my family. Both the American and British were most cooperative and sympathetic. Finally, I learned through American intelligence that both my wife and son had been murdered and cremated at Dachau almost immediately after they had been taken captive. It was tough to continue. I felt like some cruel inquisitor forcing the old man to relive memories that he had long ago probably pushed into the background of his mind in order to maintain his sanity. Still, I continued. How did you get into this country? In my affluent days, I had made many fine friends in Washington. One of them interceded with the proper immigration authorities who waived my lack of a passport. Another loaned me money for passage. I had visited Chicago in 1931 and liked its vitality, so I came here. What have you been doing all these years? He shrugged his shoulders and stared up at the ceiling. What can an ex-millionaire company president whose ambitions all died in a gas chamber do? I worked at 100 odd jobs only to survive. Nightclub janitor, cook, city sanitation work, construction work, anything. I knew I had all the necessary knowledge, experience, and ability to start a new business of my own, but I had no stomach for it anymore. There was no reason to succeed or to acquire wealth, and so I made no effort. Finally, I passed the city examinations and became a school janitor on Foster Avenue. That was very good for me. I was around laughing children all day. Very good. And now and then, I would see a lad that reminded me of my Eric. It was fine. Decent job. I retired when I was 65 and the city began paying me a small pension, enough to live and read. Whatever made you decide to become what you call a rag picker? Simon smiled and leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling, again as if trying to remember details of an event that had been long undisturbed among his memories. I moved into his small apartment soon after I retired, or this small apartment. Lazarus and myself and my books Each morning, it became a ritual for Lazarus and me to walk completely around this block. One morning, as I was leaving the building, I happened to look across the gate to the parking lot where I first met you, and there was a young lady who appeared to be in some sort of difficulty. Her automobile was parked at the approach to the gate, which was down, and she was angrily pounding on the metal box which accepts the coins that activate the gate. I went over to her and asked if I could be of assistance. She was crying. And between her sobs, she told me that she had put her last 2 quarters in the coin box and the gate had not risen. Furthermore, she was due in class at Loyola in less than 10 minutes for a final exam. I did I did what anyone else would have done. I removed 2 quarters from my pants pocket, dropped them into the coin slot, and this time the gate went up. Then I continued my walk with Lazarus. By now, the old man was pacing the room. We had not gone very far when I heard footsteps hurrying up behind me, and I turned to see the lovely young lady coming toward me, still with tears in her eyes, but smiling. Before I realized what she was doing, she had reached up, thrown her arms around me, pulled me down to her, and kissed me on the cheek. The first time a woman had embraced me since my wife. The young lady said nothing. There was just the hug and a kiss, and then she scampered off. That trivial incident was what gave my life a new meaning and direction, Mr. Ogg. I resolved to stop hiding in my small apartment, to stop feeling sorry for what life had given me, and to begin giving some of myself to others after all the years of self-pity. Actually, you see, it was a selfish decision because the feeling that went through me when that grateful girl kissed me was one that I had not known for many years. It was a feeling that only comes when one has helped another with no thought of personal gain. I have been a rag picker ever since. I felt drained. The questions and answers had exhausted me. Still, there was one more thing I had to know. Simon, you mentioned that your son's name was Eric. What was your wife's name? Mr. Ogg, my wife had a name as lovely as her, as lovely as her soul, Lisha. All I could do was sigh and whisper, Simon, please hand me my book. The old gentleman placed the book in my lap. I turned hurriedly through the first few pages and stopped on page 14. Simon, look, here, where I am pointing. Halfway down the page is the name I gave to the wife of Hafid, the greatest salesman in the world. Read it. A half sob, half cry of anguish escaped from the old man's lips as he focused on the printed page. Then he looked up at me, unbelieving, large tears forming in those unforgettable eyes. It cannot be. It can't be. He took the book in his giant hand, staring intently at the page. Finally, he raised it to his cheek, caressed it gently over his beard, and murmured over and over, Lisha, Lisha, Lisha. Okay, that is at the end of chapter 3, and somebody hung with me this whole time. I believe it was probably Melody. You are such a sweetheart. Thank you so, so much for hanging out with me. This book is amazing. Amazing. That was quite a long chapter, though. And that's a long time to keep somebody's attention for sure. But that tells me something about you, though. It tells me something about you. So, all right, I'm out of here. Good night, guys. Happy Sunday evening.